Innovation and the energy demand surge.
That is a tough act to follow, and very poignant words from the Pope. But we're going to shift a little bit from the fiscal discussions and solutions we've been talking about and talk about a very important issue where there are tremendous solutions and a lot of really interesting and positive things happening, and that is around the energy sphere. And I'm so pleased that we have joining us Roger Martella. He's the Chief Corporate Officer of GE Vernova. I'm just very excited for this conversation because there's so many exciting things happening. At first, I want to take a stab at what GE Vernova is, and let me give it a try and see how I do, and you can tell me. You are the spinoff of General Electric from about a year ago, and it is the agglomeration of all of the energy infrastructure businesses that GE has. So you really have become the leading energy infrastructure and services company. And moving that forward. Is that fair? Did I miss anything there?
I think that's super great. If you've heard of Thomas Edison, he started the first electrification revolution 135 years ago. Last April, we rang the bell on the New York Stock Exchange. We became the separate purpose-built company focused on, we help provide 25% of the world's energy, 75,000 employees, more than 100 countries, but we're the leading U.S. manufacturer of everything energy equipment. We're a global company, but in this era with tariffs and President Trump's agenda, being a U.S. company is also a significant factor too, in that we make all this equipment here in the United States.
And literally across the board, all sorts of different types of energy, traditional, gas-fired turbines for electrical plants, as well as small modular nuclear reactors and wind and you name it. So we're going to get into all of that stuff in a second. But first I want to talk about your week. You've had a pretty exciting week. And you were telling me that a few days ago, you rang the bell for Earth Day at the New York Stock Exchange. And then we'll get one second comment on that. And then on Wednesday, that was on Tuesday, is that right?
That was Tuesday.
And then on Wednesday, GE Vernova releases blockbuster, amazing earnings and record revenues and has done very well because of the surge in demand for energy products. So help us kind of understand what's going on here. I thought environmental sustainability, across the board, I thought that was like over. We're not doing that anymore. Yet you're ringing the bell on Earth Day and then seeing fantastic results come out following that. What's going on?
Well, thank you. The week is not over. I haven't checked my phone in the last 5 minutes, so I'm not sure if there's been any new posts or anything like that. But so far, so good. We're off to a good week. So as you mentioned, Andrew, yesterday we did what companies do. Once a quarter, you have an earnings call, and we reported strong earnings given all the demand and the growth for electrification in the United States and around the world. But the day before that was Earth Day. And the New York Stock Exchange had invited me and invited us to be the Earth Day company at the New York Stock Exchange because they thought we represented kind of the intersection of Wall Street and planet Earth. And so we were very proud to do it. I was very proud to be up there with my team and ring the bell, and it was a celebratory day. I think our earnings speak for themselves. You can look at that. You can look at the stock price. I won't get into that. But what we wanted to focus on Tuesday is just like we want to be a force for good for our investors, and that's very important. We have to be a force for good for our investors. We also want to be a force for good on the planet. So on Tuesday, we got to put that first part aside. That was yesterday earnings. And at the New York Stock Exchange, we got to share what we're doing to try to be a force for good for the planet. So we talk about electrification. I think we're the only company that has electrification as part of its sustainability framework. It's actually core to our framework. And so we focus on how much capacity are we putting on the grid, how much capacity are we putting on in underserved communities, and what are we doing to develop the workforce of the future. This is a solution summit. We're optimists too. How are we being optimistic about the future? We still talk about decarbonization. How are we tying the investments we're making at scale on electrification to improve the carbon intensity of emissions and address climate change? We're showing you can do both at the same time. We talk about conservation. How are we being better stewards of the planet's resources in our own operations? And we talk about people and letting people thrive. How are we lifting up communities, our employees? So if you look at Tuesday, our accountability to the planet. If you look at Wednesday, our accountability to our investors. There was a positive response yesterday. I think there's a positive response this morning. So we are trying to show these things are not contrarian. You can do both at the same time. And as the stock exchange reminded folks, we were the 4th best performing stock last year in our 4th year with a big sustainability agenda. So we're in favor of saying you can do both of these things.
Sustainability works. That's fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on with electrification. I thought we're certainly globally well electrified, but demand is surging.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about the need for energy with AI data centers as an example. There's obviously a big push to EVs. What is driving this demand?
Yeah, one of the things that's happened in the last year is there's a doubling of demand. Now, people will say that's 2030, 2035, 2040. People will debate the date, but every respected authority from the IEA to the Rhodium Group, everybody will say there's a doubling of demand that's coming, and that's how this administration is working too. They're projecting a doubling of demand. Now, in the United States, we talk a lot about data centers and artificial intelligence. That's clearly a driver here, especially for those of us who live in this region. You hear a lot about Data Center Alley in Northern Virginia. It's a percentage of it, and it's driving a lot of growth. But the reality is the world has woken up to saying we need energy. I think the war in Ukraine was a very significant kind of wake-up call for the planet that we are operating with no margin of error for electricity. And if we want to grow our economies, if we want to have economic growth, electricity is core to that. So we're in this age of electrification. And one thing that's interesting is, 25% of the world's population went to the polls last year. You all know that because this is a foreign group. A lot of times we focus on the United States. Everybody who was elected last year, whether progressive or conservative, was elected on an economic platform, the notion that the people needed to be better served on economics. What's core to that is energy. Investing in electricity, investing in energy is core to serving these economic agendas. So the whole world right now sees this as kind of the space race of the generation. We call it electrification supercycle, where I think for a generation to come, there's going to be this big uptake of growth, the doubling of demand, and we're here to serve. We're here to just serve and meet those needs and help our customers and help our markets realize those goals.
So that's fantastic and very positive and wonderful. There's always challenges that come with that kind of surge, that growth. Let's talk a little bit about GE Vernova's. So one of those might be capacity.
Sure.
Are you able to deliver on all this demand? Do you get asked a lot about that ability?
Yeah, this is our CEO. I was at Stock Exchange on Tuesday. Our CEO was there last night after earnings talking to Jim Cramer, and Jim Cramer asked him the same question and said, well, maybe this is a good problem to have. We don't think it's a problem. What we think it's something we want to solve for.
It's a challenge.
It's a challenge. And Cramer's point was, I can't call you up today and buy something tomorrow. And that's true. You can't get it tomorrow. If you called us up today, you're probably getting your product in 2028, whether that's a gas turbine or electrification equipment. We'll start looking at 2029 this year. So as a company, this is our number one challenge as a leadership team. We're working 24 hours a day to meet the capacity, to meet the demands, because we see the urgency. We want to work hard. We want to work with urgency. But we have a lot of optimism. So I'll give you one example. We've announced $8 billion in capital investments over the next few years. Earlier this year, we announced $600 million in the United States. One of our factories alone, Greenville, South Carolina, makes gas turbines, and the world is really looking for these gas turbines right now. In 3 years, we're going to go from being able to make about 16 gigawatts of gas turbines to 20 gigawatts, really to 30 gigawatts in 3 years. So almost a doubling of capacity. That involves 500 new heavy-duty machines. It involves hiring hundreds of new people, running more shifts, supply chain issues, but also involves something called lean. How can you be efficient with your manufacturing? Our gas turbines traverse the factory floor about 3 miles from beginning to end. By the time we're done, they're going to go 50 meters. So we're looking at everything, investments, more machines, more people, but even just our whole manufacturing process to meet this doubling of demand. And we're doing this all over the world in all of our factories to address the capacity point, the most important thing we're doing.
Let's talk about other challenges. You mentioned the workforce and your hiring focus. How, do you go to gas turbine construction school? How do you learn how to create these products, and how are you finding that workforce? That's a big debate right now going on with the tariff discussion. Can we reshore manufacturing? Do we have the skills and the capability to do that? This is a highly technical type of product of manufacturing. How are you meeting that challenge? First of all, is there a workforce challenge, and how are you addressing it?
There always is a workforce challenge, and that's part of the supply chain. So, a lot of policy focuses on how do you put more electrons on the grid, where our business is about making the machines that put the electrons on the grid. But we have to go a step forward. We need the people to build the machines that put the electrons on the grid. So we have to think all the way back. And the reality is, policies for some time have not suggested that this was a growth opportunity for people to spend their careers. That is now becoming the case, and we feel very strongly about being that source of relentless optimism. So we're doing a lot to invest in this space. We just reached an agreement with MIT where we're investing $50 million on their campus, but we're also going to trade schools, community schools, schools in underserved communities, and investing to make sure we have that pipeline of the next generation of leaders here. Because I believe that people, can spend their careers as being part of the solution. There's not a lot of optimistic messages out there in this space. We're trying to be a voice of optimism because we want people to come work for us. Social media is great, but come work for us and have a real impact on the world, help be part of the solution. And it's not just people, even things like castings. Like, we struggle in this country to even cast equipment and supply chain equipment at this scale. So we've got to bring back castings. We've got to encourage plumbers and electricians, all the things that it takes to build this infrastructure. But that's certainly core, just like we're building factories, we're building that pipeline of training as well.
That's fascinating. Let's talk a little bit about policy. You brought up policy that works. What current policies enabling or hindering in the growth of the energy sector? Open question. We can get into permitting reform, et cetera.
Sure.
But what, from where you sit right now, what do we need to focus on and look at?
I think we have tailwinds and we have headwinds. I think we have more tailwinds than headwinds these days. Like, one of the biggest tailwinds is 25% of the world went to the polls. And one of the things we're seeing is everybody right now recognizes energy and electrification is a priority on the agenda. We've talked about the energy transition. We've picked winners or losers. I think we've moved on from that. I think this is a game of addition, not subtraction at this point. The world needs it all. And the world is kind of united. Like, we need to electrify the planet. We need it all. And we're going to decarbonize it over time. We can show how you do that. So from a tailwind perspective, the stars are lining up towards the momentum. From a headwind perspective, the implementation doesn't always align with the best of intentions. So you talked about permitting. I think the Interior Department just issued something yesterday on permitting reform, but permitting in many places of the world is a challenge. And I go to a place like Saudi Arabia a couple of weeks ago. They just get it done. They're going to get a project done. You go to a place like here or Europe, and you talk about years and years of permitting delay, litigation, and you have to incentivize them. Like, who's going to benefit from these permitting issues? Uncertainty is the other thing too. I mean, none of us can deny we're in a world of uncertainty right now, right? I mean, I'd be insincere if I didn't say that. That's never, businesses thrive when there's more certainty. I think we're moving in that direction. I mean, I think we understand the whole world's going through a bit of a transformation right now, but certainly seeing the beginning of moving towards more certain in these environments, whether it's tariffs, trade, and other things. And that's something we very much look forward to. We want to be a constructive voice in that. We want to serve those discussions well, not only in the United States, but in all our global markets. How can we bring parties together? Ultimately, if you want to close trade deficits, electrification equipment's a great way to do it. And so how can we be a constructive voice to serve all of these markets together?
That's a really great point. Let's. I don't want this conversation to end without talking about innovation.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier small modular nuclear reactors. Maybe you could talk about those and why that's catching on, but just generally about GE Vernova and innovation and barriers that you need to overcome there. And what are you excited about? What technologies are you excited about going forward?
So innovation's always been core, going back to Thomas Edison. We've always been a company that uses innovation to lift up prosperity for people. So right now we're focused on delivering the technology the world needs, whether those are gas turbines, wind turbines, upgrading our nuclear equipment, electrification equipment. But we have to be thinking about the breakthrough technologies at the same time that get commercialized next decade. Hydrogen, carbon capture, ammonia, direct air capture. But SMRs, small modular reactors, are kind of like front and center in this discussion of breakthrough technologies for a lot of reasons. First of all, the world is betting on nuclear again. Over the last couple of years, going back to COP28, there's a projection of a tripling of nuclear. It's also kind of just like AI and data centers. This is a space race technology. Someone's going to innovate it. Someone's going to develop it. Who's going to do it? If we don't do it, someone else is. And so there's a bit of a space race going on here for this technology. And third is the connection, kind of the data centers and AI. There's a nice nexus between dispatchable power from small modular reactors, co-locating them with data centers, helping hyperscalers realize their carbon intensity, their carbon goals, and things like that. So we're really proud of our small modular reactor. We will be the first to commercialize a small modular reactor this decade. We just got a license to construct, the first in the Western world to have a license to construct up in Darlington, Canada, and very much talking through partnerships with the Trump administration, with people like Governor Youngkin, other state leaders, hyperscalers, and energy providers, excuse me, to make sure the U.S. is delivering and being very aggressive at leading kind of the SMR technology, not only for the U.S., but for our friends and allies and partnerships, because this is a very coveted technology.
Since you bring up Canada and SMRs and this new reactor launch in Canada, how did and you talked about geopolitics and trade and gas turbines and the like and electrification equipment playing a role in that. How is that working right now with Canada and the U.S. and this what sounds like a real breakthrough deal in North America?
I mentioned our goal is to be a force for good and hopefully smoothing out some of these discussions. I think we have the opportunity. I think Canada is a good example. I won't speak of broader tensions, but on this SMR front, there's a lot of collaboration of understanding what's good for Canada on this is good for the U.S. and vice versa. Canada's moving forward with it, and that helps the U.S. move forward faster too. It's being innovated here. It's being developed here, but it's going to be built there. And how does the U.S. learn from that so that we can move faster? So I think this is a great example of how energy equipment can really help smooth over some of these tariffs and these trade issues. And we're going to use that as a template for other places in the world.
Outstanding. That's a great point to depart on. Roger, when we began today's discussion, we talked about solutions and the importance of finding how innovative companies and civil society and governments are solving some of the challenges that we have. And I think GE Vernova is a great example of that. So thank you so much for sharing some of those thoughts and insights.
We're here to serve. So
Roger Martella, GE Vernova. Thank you. Please.
Next, please